Number 1. The fight over his body. Moses evokes different images in different people's minds when mentioned. The death of Moses is shrouded in some mystery in the Bible. We know he died at the age of 120, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. Despite his age, Moses was still in his prime when he was called home. Moses died alone, but in peace. The account of his passing is contained within the final 6 verses of the Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34. Death puts things into perspective, doesn't it? In the Bible, only Moses is buried by God personally. Do you realize that? The tomb was then hidden by the Lord. What made him do that? Because that grave would have been turned into a shrine. After a death comes a burial, and so it was in the case of Moses. But verse 6 contains one of the most remarkable statements about the whole great career of Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 6. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Jude verse 9 refers to an event not found anywhere else in the Bible. Michael had to struggle or dispute with Satan about the body of Moses, but what that entailed is not described. Jude 9. Yet Michael the Archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." This event occurs in Jude. Here Jude shares with us an incident that is found nowhere else in the Bible. The question naturally arises, where did he get this information? Some say that the information was passed down by tradition. This may or may not be so. We have no definite knowledge why the dispute arose between Michael and Satan about the body of Moses. It is not unlikely that Satan wanted to know the spot to have a shrine built there. Today, people would still be erecting shrines, selling popcorn and peanuts, offering various rides, and maybe even running a tram with banners proclaiming Moses' burial place. As a result, it was concealed. This was so crucial to the Lord that it even sparked an angelic confrontation. Michael refused to presumptuously render judgment. Instead, he simply announced the Lord's rebuke. Despite his great power, Michael remains completely submissive to the Lord. The righteous angels have a rank and are submissive to authority. Considering Michael's strength, the archangel's submission to God is all the more beautiful. We can see that submission is never meant to take away an individual's strength or purpose or value. The strength of Angel Michael was not under dispute, as the last mention of Michael the Archangel appears in Revelation 12:7 as Satan is thrown out of heaven. Confrontation is a necessary evil. No one enjoys it, but it must be done in order to rectify, purify, and unify the community. Number 2, a great mourning. You can't help but wonder, did those Hebrews who often grumble about him adore him, or was he just a convenient target who served as a lightning rod for their discontent? Were they inclined to think of him as a distant, profound man of God? The answer is found in verse 8, when he died. Deuteronomy 34:8, New King James Version. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. The Israelites will miss the wise counsel of their late leader. His work among them stirred their emotions to such a degree that it took an entire month for them to mourn his passing after he had left them. As great as Moses was, the days of mourning for him ended. It was time to move on. God's program did not end with Moses, nor did it end with any man. The torch is passed, and God's work goes on. Number 3, Transfiguration. This transfiguration of Jesus is mentioned in each of the Gospel books as an important event in Jesus' life and proof of his divinity. Jesus leads only 3 of his followers, Peter, James, and John, to a high mountain after performing a series of miracles and foretelling his own death. This is the scene of the Transfiguration, in which his appearance is radiantly transformed. Jesus takes the inner circle of followers with him and ascends a high mountain. According to Luke, the goal of this was to pray. However, Jesus is most likely taking the inner circle to provide them with further experience of future leadership responsibilities within the church. Luke chapter 9, verse 28, New King James Version. Now it came to pass, about 8 days after these sayings, that he took Peter, John, and James, and went up on the mountain to pray. Matthew chapter 17, verse 2, New King James Version. And he transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. The urgency of the preceding call for the disciples to take up their cross in the light of Jesus' soon-coming glory is now readily understood, because 3 of them receive an absolute revelation of Jesus' identity. There must be no hesitancy or delay in following Jesus with all one's heart and soul, for unreserved commitment to Jesus Messiah is required for those who have witnessed His glory. According to the Gospels, Jesus is transfigured while on the mountain, to indicate that God is in charge of the transformation. Paul uses the same verb to express the spiritual transformation that believers go through as a result of regeneration. During this transfiguration, 2 of the most important Old Testament figures, Moses and Elijah, appear. Their entrance symbolizes the law and the prophets bearing witness to Jesus the Messiah who fulfills the Old Testament. Jews view Moses as one of their greatest leaders, but Jesus is even greater. Moses is the one whom God used to give the law, and Elijah the one who connects the earlier charismatic prophecy of the days of Samuel with the later writing prophets. Moses is also regarded as the model prophet and Elijah as the Messiah's forerunner. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, New King James Version. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. Moses and Elijah both saw glimpses of God's splendor on a mountain, Moses on Mount Sinai and Elijah on Mount Horeb. Exodus chapter 24, verse 15, New King James Version. Then Moses went up into the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. Both Moses and Elijah of them had special endings. Elijah was taken directly to heaven. Malachi chapter 4, verses 4 through 6 mention the God through God's servant Moses and the sending of the prophet Elijah before the impending day of the Lord. Their presence on the mountain with Jesus demonstrates Jesus' majesty, as the one who will be called the Son of God transcends them both. The cloud of God's presence appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai. His Shekinah brightness filled the tabernacle. The cloud of God's presence guided the Israelites in the wilderness, and the cloud of the Lord's glory filled Solomon's temple. Jesus has fulfilled both the law and the prophets, as evidenced by his superiority over Moses and Elijah, whose revelations eventually point to Jesus. But Jesus is the incarnated Son of God, the ultimate prophet who fulfills Moses' prophecy. The disciples must listen to him in order to understand his messianic mission. When the disciples glance up, they only see Jesus. Their attention is now solely on Jesus, as Moses and Elijah would have preferred, because their ultimate significance was in preparing the way for Messiah, the Son of God, and his redemptive purpose. Although the disciples have had the most explicit revelation of Jesus' identity, they still do not fully comprehend what they have witnessed. Number 4. The 2 witnesses. A description of 2 people who will assist in carrying out the work that God has for them to do during the time of the tribulation can be found in Revelations chapter 11, verses 3 through 12. Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 through 5, New King James Version. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. At the beginning of the church age, John on Patmos is the prophet. At the end, 2 witnesses will prophesy in the city of Jerusalem. There is a sense of impending disaster in the spectacular appearance of these 2 mighty. The 6th and 7th trumpets focus on the human channels through which the divine revelations are communicated. The key word in both chapters is prophesy. Revelation chapter 10, verse 11, New King James Version. And he said to me, You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings.